Welcome to People More Interesting Than Me, the podcast, where I step back and let fascinating individuals take the spotlight. Join me as I sit down with incredible guests who captivate and inspire, showcasing their stories, experiences, and wisdom that make them truly extraordinary. Tune in for engaging conversations that'll leave you enlightened and entertained. At least I'm entertained. This week I have Andre Lujan, the owner of PaleoTex. For those who might not know, PaleoTex is at the cutting edge of paleontology, specializing in fossil excavation, preparation, and restoration. Andre has turned his passion for ancient life into a thriving business that brings the past to life, quite literally. From uncovering prehistoric mysteries to preserving invaluable specimens, Andre and his team are making waves in both the scientific community and the world at large. In this episode, we'll explore Andre's journey, how he transformed his passion for paleontology into a successful business, the challenges he's faced in the field, and what it's like to work on some of the most exciting fossil discoveries. If you're a fan of dinosaurs, science, or entrepreneurship, you're in for a treat. Enjoy. Okay, today we have one interview that I have been looking forward to. It is Andre Lujan, and he is a paleontologist. And I know this is, cliche, but every boy between the ages of 0 to 8 or 15, it sticks with some people forever, obviously you. But little Michael and my son, rekindled the fire in me as well, because he's he's a bigger dino fan from you when he tells you I get corrected constantly on I'll call oh, that's a Diplosaurus. He's like, no, that's not a Diplosaurus. And you just, you feel stupid when a 3-year-old's correcting you. That's pretty bad. But first off, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate you. We finally getting this to work. And obviously you said you were on a dig, so that's plenty of reason to stall anything. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to share my experience and hopefully enlighten some people on what paleontologists do and how they could enter the field if they have a desire to do that.
No, that's great. And quick question before I forget. Do you ever use that as a really good excuse? I feel oh, I've got to go to a prehistoric dig of a dinosaur that's never been discovered. I wasn't able to make it to jury duty. You know what I mean? I feel like that's it's usually never used ever. And it's just what do you say to that? You know what I mean? Besides your wife, who probably hears that all the time, you know what I mean? Or your spouse or whomever.
Yeah, no, my wife's pretty used to it. She gets to join me on digs, but no, I've actually never had the opportunity to use that as an excuse for jury duty.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm waiting for the day, because that would be great. But hey, I'm a paleontologist. We're doing some really important scientific research. I've got to go to the remote corners of Montana, and I'm not going to be able to make it. And I'd be curious to see what the district attorney or whoever
you know what they would say. It's been there for
Right.
Millions of years. It'll be there for another. I don't know.
That's probably right.
So can you start us off on kind of a bit of your background and obviously what got you to want to, take this out of the 5-year-old stage and kind of really dig into it, if I might make a pun?
Yeah, no, that's great. I love a good dinosaur pun, a paleontology pun. I'll save my origin story, for the end.
Okay.
But like every young person, I just really had a fascination with dinosaurs, and I kind of leaned into it. And I've done a lot of things. I used to be into art and just always using my imagination. But in high school, being into dinosaurs is not very conducive to social standing. So I kind of closeted my paleontology for a while. But then when I got out of high school and entered my career field, I was a laboratory technician. I was an environmental project manager. I just kind of felt like, man, it doesn't have to be like this. I don't have to have a stale, boring life. I should do what I want to do. So I've always had the hobby. I was going out collecting fossils, going to shows, doing things like that. But my wife kind of supported me and taken the leap of faith. And I said, look, I want to do this. And she knew, I mean, she could see how unhappy I was. I mean, I had a great job, but it wasn't fulfilling me, totally. So in 2016, I left my career in environmental science, founded my company, PaleoTex, and never looked back. And it's been an incredible journey, and applying all of those skills that I learned along the way, dental laboratory technology, that hand dexterity, using microscopes, working on really delicate things. And in environmental science, I did a lot of phase 2 geotechnical work. So I was outside looking at geology, understanding why things are happening and why they're not happening. Really kind of prepared me for this career that I have now.
No, that's great. And I mean, I think it's crazy how much overlap some people don't realize that like professions that have nothing well, some professions that have nothing to do with it still give you such a kind of a leg up into something that obviously in this case is kind of completely different. Not completely different, obviously on a material level. Well, you can make arguments on that, but that they work so well together in kind of comparing your dexterity to this to, millions of year old bones that you're trying to unearth rather than, something that gives you more purpose.
Right. No, it's interesting. And as time goes on, I realized that paleontology is the everything science. I mean, if you have culinary skills, believe it or not, they're applicable in paleontology, because when you go out in the field and you spend weeks, sleeping in the dirt and battling the weather, at the end of the day, the most important thing in your life is a good meal. And so a camp cook is as valuable as a machine operator in my camp. And so, I mean, I think that I haven't encountered any skills that are not applicable to the field of paleontology at this point. I mean, even somebody who's like a statistical mathematician, I'll say, hey, I'd love to know the answer to this question. We find hundreds of these bones and we only find dozens of these bones. Can you calculate like what's going on here? Can you give me an average or a statistical estimate of when we should find these, or per how many bones we should find these? And so even statistical math comes into play at some point. So I've yet to find a skill or a discipline that doesn't apply to paleontology in some way.
That's a good stepping stone into my next question that kind of overlaps. What was your first experience like of your first dig?
So my first actual dig was I guess it was about 2009. I was out working in the dental field. I worked 410s, so it was a European schedule. So I had a 3-day weekend for 5 years. It was amazing. And none of my friends were off on Friday. So I had this whole day to just go look for fossils, which was great because then I wasn't taking away from anything else in my life. And I was out on this place and I found a little piece of bone sticking out of the ground, and I tried to pull it and it was stuck. And I was like, oh man, cool, this is big. And I'd never found anything big at this point. So I started uncovering it and it turned into a 14.5-foot long fish called a Zephactinus, which is similar to a modern day tarpon, saltwater fish. But this fish had a 6-foot fish in its stomach. And so this was my first like big dig. This is the first big fossil I've ever found. It was articulated, meaning all the bones were connected as they were in life. And it was just kind of laid out like on a big platter. And I ended up digging this huge trench. And at this time, there was like this huge dust storm blowing in from West Texas. So the sun, like the sky was all orange. And I just vividly remember like it was such an incredible moment in my life because it was like, this is what I've been working for, this is what I've dreamed of. And here I am, like crossing the finish line. Finally, I found a skeleton and I'm excavating it and just, sitting back and looking at this enormous hole in these piles of dirt and seeing this skeleton that no other human being's ever seen before. And just realizing that, you know what? I'm a paleontologist. I'm a paleontologist. I did it. I've achieved the goal.
Oh, that's great.
That one certainly stands out in my mind.
No, that's great. And then I guess you said 2009, so you started in 2016. I guess you were, I don't know, gearing up, and I guess you probably went on a couple more digs in between that period to kind of get you finally over that hump of like, jumping in, like you said, your own company.
Yeah, so I mean, I was doing it on the side. I had an eBay business. I'd go out and collect fossils and sell some fossils, go to local shows. I had a little prep lab in my house and had experience and was using all the skills that I'd gained, in my previous jobs and was volunteering. I was a member of I'm a life member of the Dallas Paleontological Society. I was a It is a fantastic organization. Had the opportunity to mentor and volunteer on different digs and just getting experience anywhere I could. I spent a lot of time at the library reading books that were so boring, to the average person, but to me it was like I'm just feeding my brain all this knowledge about the local geology and what kind of fossils I can find and making this hit list of like, okay, well I got to go to North Texas and I got to find one of these and I got to go to East Texas and I got to find one of these and so I was a novice but pretty experienced at the time. So I didn't think in 2009 I certainly wasn't ready to start a business, but that's where my head was at and that's where my heart was at.
So the way you phrase it, kind of like setting up different areas to dig, obviously, is it kind of what I want to phrase is obviously some people discover dinosaurs accidentally from, like big digs or excavating or literally just tripping over it. But is most of it like there's areas that are known to be kind of like um like you said, mathematicians. I would imagine there's been models done of, like obviously Texas to know like these areas are the ones that were, I don't know what the core samples are, but I would imagine specific core samples of certain areas have a higher likelihood of having fossils. Is that something that is more modeled and backed up and checked rather than, like surprisingly to find a new set of dinosaur bones? Like, is it more model driven or is it more surprise? Here's a dinosaur. Uh,
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and that's one I get asked a lot. And so the short answer is no. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should never be a surprise. That's not how you want to find an important skeleton. But the surface geology of our entire country and most of the world has been uh, meticulously mapped. And so in the search, especially since like the Industrial Revolution and petroleum and gold mining and all the other resources that we need in our modern society have uh, led geologists abroad, like out into the field to to map and document all the different formations and take core samples. And so all that data is available publicly, and you get these wonderful geological survey maps. And you can look at this map and it's color coded and it tells you, well, the green rocks are Cretaceous and the red rocks are Paleozoic. And you go to the map key and say, okay, well, in the Eagle Ford Formation, which is exposed all along the west side of my town, you can find XYZ fossils. So literally, as a paleontologist, all the hard work has been done for me. And I do mean that because I have a treasure map. I have a treasure map for any county, any state in the lower 48. So I can just, if I get bored, I'm like, man, I wonder what's in eastern Oklahoma. I can pull out a geological survey map and it'll tell me what rocks, what age rocks, and what's in the rocks. And then all I have to do is go find an exposure and start digging.
And usually that obviously there's some legal things where obviously you get permission by like whoever the land rights owners are. And what is that like? Like when you ask them, do they be like, "Oh, let's like do they just let you dig or is there ever like a finder's fee like if you find something or I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
kind of curious to me on that.
No, that's a good question, and it's very important, and I can't stress this enough. Private property rights reign supreme. So I always ask permission, and it's easy to find like the public information about who owns land. It's also out there. Like you don't have to guess. If it's a ranch and they just have a bunch of cattle out there and there's no house, you can go find out who owns the property, and sometimes it's a slow process because you have to write a letter, to a PO box, and you have to hope that they write you back or that they give you a call.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't get that call back. Um, but once you do make contact with the landowner, uh, I usually just tell them, hey, I have a hobby. This is what I'm interested in. I have this museum. I'd like to go look for these fossils that I think are there. And I will sign a lease with them. And, I carry ridiculous amounts of insurance to cover any incidentals, if I'm injured on their property. And that gives a lot of people peace of mind too. It's like, well, I don't want you on my land because if you get hurt, then you're going to sue me.
That makes
Um,
complete sense and I wouldn't even think about it, but yeah.
I mean, it's a business. So I tell them like, here's a hold harmless agreement. Here is my certificate of insurance. Here is a lease that lays out the terms. You're giving me permission to do these specific things on your property. And then beyond that, sometimes they have no interest in the fossils whatsoever. They're like, well, just, keep what you find, be careful, close the gates. Sometimes they want a percentage of whatever's found. Sometimes they just want like, hey, give me, a couple $1,000 in a year and you can just go have fun. So it really depends on the person and what their interest is,
Have
in
you
what
had a
I'm doing.
weird ask before? Like, oh, I just want one tooth of whatever it is you get. No weird ask
Yeah.
or anything like that?
Uh no, I did get asked for a forest fire rider on my insurance policy for $1 million. And this was up in
Hmm.
Montana, which, when forest fires are like a big deal up there. And I was like, okay. So I called my insurance agent and I was like, hey, they're happy to let me go on there, but they want this rider. And we got it all worked out. But there is one property that I've leased here in Texas, and they don't they don't want me to pay anything. They don't want a percentage of anything. But if I find like some weird, like just really bizarre fossil I've never found before, they like to keep it. Uh, so
Hmm.
I'm like, sure, that's fine. So I found this enormous coprolite, which is a fossilized feces, and so I contacted him. I was like, hey man, I have this enormous turd, and it's like 280 million years old. Is this
We'll
is
take
this
it.
the thing? Yeah. So I haven't heard back, but I think that might be the one.
No, that's great. That's awesome. And I just love the name Copperlight because I'm familiar with it from reading books with my kid, and it's probably the most eloquent name I've ever heard for poop. Like
Yeah.
they picked a great uh great name for it. I don't know the Latin roots of it, but it just comes out perfect.
Yeah.
Uh so do you use any like modern tools before you like break in? Do you have any I know you have tools on site at your company. Is there any tools in the field that you can kind of use to kind of gauge where you're at before you kind of dig in?
So we do use like, I mean, obviously GPS, a lot of satellite imagery
Hmm.
in really rugged places where there might not be any driving access. So you got to really kind of study the maps and look at Google Earth and try to figure out, okay, what's going to be the easiest way to get to this area that we want to collect. Drones sometimes come in handy.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I have I have used ground penetrating radar before, hoping to have like a Jurassic Park moment, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's everyone wants to hope it's, you know. Yeah, I did see something recently that was kind of interesting. It was you're familiar with Fleur, right? The people
Yes.
behind night vision. recently I saw something that was like you could put on goggles and see what's emanating sound. I thought that was pretty interesting. That was new. It was like you could see it was like bright red was what's like producing the sound, and then everything else was like silent. Obviously
Whoa.
that wouldn't apply here, but like everyone, you know, based off the movies, based off like Mission Impossible or some like James Bond movie, um, people think like scans can be like so in depth or like I don't know. I think it's crazy, but
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking. But like once you get back to the lab, I feel like there's like a lot more stuff you can kind of do before you know, like dig in, just because if anything, paleontology is a one of the biggest measure twice, cut once, because you can't really
Yes.
go back. Like that's
Right.
it's like you messed up. Like there's no I mean there is gluing it back together, but it's like I don't need to explain any further.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we do a lot of fixing in the lab, but there are tools once the fossil's out of the ground. Um, we have 3D scanners. You know, we have like 4 micron resolution, and so we'll digitally scan fossils, and it's really awesome. So if we're doing a restoration, we have this skeleton, and we have a left arm, but we don't have a right arm. Traditionally you would have an artist sculpt it. You know, they're looking at the original bones and they're sculpting, they're mirroring it and sculpt it. But now with the scanner, I can just scan it with structured light, and then I can flip it in the computer and I can print the missing parts, which is awesome. Saves us so much time. And then we can use CT to peer inside of jackets and look inside of bones for pathology and strange things. And there's also XRF, which we can, you know, it's like a handheld mass spectrometer. You can shoot it with this XRF and you can get a chemical profile of what this bone is made of, and that can aid us in looking for soft tissue preservation sometimes. So technology is really really has a huge role in paleontology, and it's only going to continue to have a role in paleontology. And I imagine that at some point, people are going to start applying AI to processing these massive amounts of data that we have about fossils. Um, I kind of envision a future where, you know, paleontologists now, when they're studying something and trying to describe a new dinosaur, they're hand measuring with calipers and they're taking photographs and they're notating this and that. But if we scanned all those fossils and we put all of those scans into an AI and wrote an algorithm and said, look for differences, you know, identify trends, then it could process like 20 years worth of work in 20 minutes. And I think that's really going to revolutionize science, and we're going to learn a lot in a very short period of time.
I completely agree with you. And I feel like that should also apply to medical care systems because I feel like if there's a lot more connectivity with that, I feel like there would be a lot more what do you call it? Trends basically based off of like, you know, like so many people steps a day or, you know, a trend between diabetes and cancer, something like that, where you can kind of make easy trends based off of AI models. Because one thing that I recently heard, I know this is going to sound completely random, but uh, it was something that I was talking about paleontologists, because I didn't even think this existed, and it kind of like opens my eyes that like the Dracorex, like this newly found dinosaur in the last 10 or 20 years or whatever, because it was named after like a Harry Potter character or something.
Yeah,
And the Pachycephalosaurus might be the same dinosaur. And because it might be like in a late stage or like one was an early stage. And that just kind of like, you know, it's something like before they come out with it, you think they like might postulate that or think about it. So it I think it's fascinating in one retrospect that it's not down to an exact science, which kind of makes it a little mystical because like we can also and like just like you know, like I guess you can't tell what color they are. You can't tell what the texture was. You can't, and that's I feel like that's a little bit, like cool to think about. It's like when you read a book, and I don't know if you're familiar with like any, it doesn't matter, but when you're reading a book and it's completely different from the movie because in your head you have unlimited funding. Like your brain can imagine anything it wants, but when it
Right.
brings it to reality, like Jurassic Park obviously mysticizes like the dinosaurs. There's a lot of inaccuracies. And for example, if you had read about dinosaurs before even seeing Jurassic Park, like it it would be completely different. It might be even more like amazing. I just it's fascinating to me that we don't know so much. Like, and I feel like it's still going to be like that in like 10 or 20 years. We're still going to keep learning and advancing, but and I don't know if that's why you're drawn to it as well that, like a lot of stuff these days, I mean, obviously there's still a lot we can learn from like physics or like biology, but it's all present. It's not something that we have to kind of take the clues from. It's not something that we can constantly work on because it's around. You're using what we have to kind of uncover um, and kind of verify what we already have. Just like this, what I talked about the Dracorex and the Pachycephalosaurus, it's not a fact. Like it
No, it's hotly debated. No,
yeah.
that's a really great point. And so I think one of the problems, and it's not necessarily a problem, but one of the realities, right, in paleontology is uh human bias. So we're interpreting these objects, and really the scientific method is observable, testable, repeatable, right? So we can observe this bone, we can test it certain ways. Is that experiment repeatable? When we increase the sample size of this certain type of dinosaur bones, do our interpretations and hypotheses of this animal, do they pan out to be correct? The problem with that is um, everybody has a different interpretation. So that's why I think AI would be such a powerful tool because it's unbiased, right? If you give it parameters and say, look for this feature that is universally accepted to be a feature of X dinosaur. Do any of these other possible dinosaurs share that feature? And the AI, is just going to do what you tell it to do. It's not going to say, well, it could be, maybe it's a female, or maybe it's a juvenile, or maybe it's a transitional thing. It's just going to do science. And I think that would be a good kind of reality check because as we've gone forward in paleontology, a lot of taxa or genus groups of dinosaurs have been consolidated or just thrown out altogether because they were wrong. Because some well-respected paleontologist had an idea and everybody was like, yeah, he's brilliant, and he published all these papers and described this whole new branch of dinosaurs. And it turns out like it was wrong, and so that's a serious problem for paleontologists today because when you're publishing, when you're doing research, you have to cite all these papers. And now you have to sift through a bunch of information that you may know is incorrect, but to publish, you still have to cite it. And I think AI would help us clean up some of that mess.
That is one of the silliest things I've ever heard. That's like I don't know if you had to take like a math or have ever done with math proofs before, like distributive property and all this. It's like if you had to like prove something in math, but like the stepping stones of what you actually have to explain it with aren't even, like finite or like proven. Oh,
Right.
that's great. It's like a polar bear jumping from one loose iceberg to the other. Like,
It absolutely is.
ah.
And the thing is, like, you can't go back and have conversations with these paleontologists who published this paper 100 years ago, but that is the foundation of research. And slowly it's starting to come around, but it's an arduous process, to undo a century of accepted scientific fact.
Well, and just like what I said before, I mean, it's so hard to do that when you have like limited access and limited samples as well. Like you said, these people who were around 100 years ago, it's not just that they're not here anymore. It's maybe the items that they had aren't here anymore. Like somebody else, like I would imagine you've had issues where you've had to track down items that have been but like between 3 or 10 museums where you're kind of playing like, I don't know, a TV show or like a movie where they're tracking down this thing that's been back and forth between hands, and it like in the end it's like lost in the ether.
Well, a sad reality is that type specimens, right, the one which all others are described from, are lost all the time, gone. I mean, sometimes they're things that are, like war. So think about like the Spinosaurus that was destroyed in Berlin when we bombed Berlin during World War II. A lot of things were destroyed. But even in modern times, I'm going to tell you something that's going to absolutely blow your mind. So I was just sitting at my desk one day. I get a call, and this lady calls me. She says, "Hey, I'd like to bring some fossils in. I purchased a storage locker at auction, and I got some fossils, and I'd love to, see if they're worth anything." So I said, "Sure, bring them by the museum." So she shows up. She's got a carload of stuff. She opens the first thing, and it's this taxidermized cat skeleton. It's just totally bizarre. I was like, all right, this is going to be weird. So then she's pulling some other things out. There's some slides, and I was like, "Well, where are the bones?" She was like, "Oh, they're back there." So she hands me the cigar box. I pop it open. It is a absolutely beautiful ceratopsian metatarsal. And I was like, wow, this is nice. Like, this is museum quality nice. So I flip it over, and I see a collection number and 4 letters. It says AMNH, American Museum Natural History, right? And I was like, no, this is a mistake. So I was like, open the next box, AMNH, AMNH, AMNH. And so then I pull out an identification card. It says Pentaceratops sternbergi, type specimen, skull on exhibit. And these are all on AMH. These are their collection labels. So I said, "Where did you get these?" And she said, "I bought them at the storage locker." So I quickly purchased all the fossils from her. I ran inside. I got on the phone. I called the curator at the,
By the way,
American
do you
Museum of
mind
Nature.
telling me how much you bought them for? I'm just
It
curious.
was $2,500
Okay.
for
Is
for
that a good price?
it was way more than I wanted to pay because she paid a couple $100 for the locker, but she
Okay.
was going to sell them on eBay.
By the way, does it
These are
usually go
national
like that?
treasures.
How often do you get people like coming to you like, "Hey, I might have some fossils." How often does
Um,
that happen?
Man, okay, so it happens all the time, but more often than not, they're not fossils.
They're
It's a
cat
rock
skeletons, basically.
yeah, some weird thing. A lot of pareidolia. But
But I mean,
anyways,
this story is the one that keeps you.
yes, this is the one. So I called the curator and I said, "You're never gonna guess what I have." And I told her, and she's like, "No, you don't." And I was like, "Well, here's this collection number, here's this collection number, here's this collection number." And she said, "Where did you get these?" And so I explained her the story, and she's like, "No, this is not possible." So I sent her photos. She's losing her mind because these are part of the type specimen, right? This should be in the arc of fossils. And so, anyway, she goes in collections, and she finds a handwritten note from a paleontologist from like 25 years ago. It said, "Hey, I'm checking these out. I'm going to borrow these bones, blah, 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 blah." Well, it turns out that paleontologist left her position there, moved, got sick, was put in end of life care, and passed away. And these things were, along with the rest of her office and research, were in a storage locker that
In
got
Texas.
auctioned.
Because
So,
her office is in DC, I assume, right? Is that right?
uh, she moved around from college to college.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't even recall her name, but I was like, how can this be? How can type specimen fossils end up in a storage locker auction? So even our system of curation at museums is not perfect. So you're exactly right. Like, things get lost, And how could we go back and prove or disprove a new theory about that animal if the type specimen was gone? Then it's just going to be an unanswered question for all of eternity.
That is crazy. I didn't, and that's one of the things I didn't even think about that. Like you would have, like all of these are done from kind of like a basis. Like I know that like the Triceratops, there's like a ton of branches off of the Triceratops, like Pentaceratops, blah 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 blah. But like I didn't even think of it as kind of like an origin, not origin, but something that's kind of like this is this group. This is the I don't remember all the fancy names, quadrupods or like the groups. And I don't even think that's really fascinating that it's like it makes me think of what do they call that? The seed safe or whatever that they have like
Yep.
for apocalypses. I would imagine that there needs to be like a dinosaur like vault like that. Like, oh, here's our best specimen of like the T-Rex. Here's the best specimen of the Spinosaurus. Here's our, like that's crazy. And the other thing is like when you privatize stuff like that, which, probably a lot of it is besides the museums, like you'll never get it. That's the thing. Like it's just been so far out of like control. Because is there, this better than I would, but are there a lot of skeletons that are just like hanging in like billionaires' mansions or something like that?
Yeah, there are, but so recently, good friend of mine sold a dinosaur at Sotheby's. It's the most expensive dinosaur ever sold, $40 million.
I will never hear that sentence again. My friend
Yeah,
sold a dinosaur.
40, well, the hammer price was $44.6 million. Um, and yes, a hedge fund billionaire bought it. But there's nothing really unique about it other than it's the largest stegosaur out there. It's not the most complete. It doesn't have any particular pathologies or anything that make it like super scientifically important. It's just a beautiful specimen, right? And I know of at least 6 other stegosaurs that are on the market right now. So in cases like that where I would consider it a common fossil, I don't see any issue with that. And in fact, a lot of these people, so the billionaires and the millionaires that buy these dinosaurs, where did they end up? In museums.
Yeah, they
So
usually
when
die
they,
and then their
yeah,
collections. Yeah, yeah.
so they don't go back to the market. The family has this huge liability for an estate tax and they donate it in their father's name or their uncle's name to whatever museum and so they eventually all find their way to the museum, dinosaur skeletons. Now there's a lot of like small stuff like T-Rex teeth. Like who cares? It doesn't have any scientific value. Um, a lot of times large collections of teeth when they get donated to museums, they get crushed for isotope study, right? So they'll destroy them and they'll like heat them up and look at the gases and do all this other stuff. And they're like, oh, okay, well, there's a concentration of isotopes from this other type of animal. And they can kind of put together the food web, like who was eating who. And that's interesting, but you're destroying the fossils. So I don't think there's any problem at all with people owning fossils or, the commercial paleontology market. I think it just boils down to ethics and like personal responsibility as a seller. If you know that it has importance, really the burden falls on you. You shouldn't pass the baton to somebody who's willing to pay you millions of dollars for it. Like you should have done the right thing. And I'll give you a good example of that. I found a brand new genus of armored dinosaur in Texas. It's an ankylosaur, so it's the club-tailed armored dinosaur, and it's the first one ever found in the state. It's a brand new genus, so it represents a whole new group of these dinosaurs. And I immediately started getting offers to buy this dinosaur. But because it's new to science, the first ever found in our state, I donated it. And I did get a very sizable tax write-off, that was really nice. But you don't get the opportunity to do the right thing. You can't go back and do the right thing. Like you get one chance. And I made the decision to donate it to science because that's where it belongs. Like it's the type specimen now. So every other time we find a bone from this animal, it's going to be measured against and compared to this fossil. It's the most important fossil. And so in cases like that, I think there's no question about what needs to be done. But something like another stegosaur or another triceratops or another whatever, who cares? You know, every museum in the world who wants a triceratops has a triceratops. So they're dinosaurs are not rare by any means.
Is there, just thinking of this, I would imagine is there a like a universal log kind of like showing the location of like specific, like you say, like different genuses, like, oh, Stegosaurus, there's one located in Istanbul, there's one located in Madrid, or something like that, that kind of like, kind of helps paleontologists like you kind of track down questions you would have.
So like, are you saying where they were discovered or where they're in private collections?
Private collections, I would say.
No, I don't think there's any database like that. But the European model is paleontologists over there will publish on fossils in private collections because they have a better system of cooperation, public and private, and they'll say, hey, this is with the estate of Mr. So and so, and and the estate has a responsibility like, oh, okay, well, if it ever leaves our estate, we're going to let the British Museum know because they published a paper on it. And so I think I would love to see that happen in the US. Um, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Because touching on something that you said, and being from engineering background, it would be amazing. Obviously, nowadays everyone, that's not true. A lot of people have their own 3D printers, for example, now. And the only reason I say this is like, if being able to have the 3D scans of like so many different dinosaurs, it's like having that open source information, just like you talked about, like, oh, we don't have what like the knee looks like for um, this dinosaur. Like, let me check the registry if like they have that for that like genus or that specific species in that area. Like, obviously that's like a super specific example, but like if they had done the 3D scans, you don't need to do guesswork, or is that already in operation where you want to ask
It's
them?
Yeah, that is starting to happen, but there's so much gatekeeping in paleontology. It's nobody wants to get scooped on their research. So, and the problem is that research, as we talked about earlier, is so arduous because you have to go to all these institutions and you have to physically see this bone and you have to measure it and you have to compare it to yours and you got to go to this other museum and you got to read all these papers. Uh, a lot of paleontologists have 20 or 30 or 40 manuscripts going throughout their career and they will never be finished, you know? So it's really odd. It's the publish or die mentality in paleontology. To be relevant, not so much for me because I'm on the commercial, I'm on the lab side, right? I do the actual work. I don't do the research. Um, if you are not producing research, you just kind of become irrelevant. And so there's two ways to make it. You can uh, innovate, come up with a new idea, a new theory, and you can prove it, and you can publish on it, and you can kind of bushwhack further into our understanding of our ancient history, or you can find somebody else's work that you think is weak, and you can just shred it, and you can take their place.
That is
And
such
so,
a choose your journey. Do you want to be a pioneer, or do you want to be a I don't know what you would phrase this as, a burner of.
yeah, the burner. Yeah. I mean, I think, but a lot of people choose that path because it's way easier to find a paper and say, well, I know that's wrong, and I can articulate why it's wrong, and I can basically take their place on the leaderboard as a researcher by just destroying other people's work. And I don't I don't think that's the right mentality. I think it should be more open source. I think if we really want to do better in the field of paleontology and even like medical science and stuff like that, there should be less gatekeeping and there should be more open source information for everybody to contribute because you may see something that every other paleontologist has missed. But if you don't have access to that information, you can never make that observation.
Yeah. I completely agree. I and I pulled to the fact that I think you made a good comment with the AI. That way, like it takes the human error out of it, if that makes any sense. Like not making it an issue of, every flavor of humanity, greed, religion, blah, 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 etc. Where it's like, these are the facts. This is what I've like kind of articulated from these commonalities, and this is kind of where we go from here. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think we'll see that. Oh, I have one question. Have you ever seen a subtractive, this is going to sound stupid, but a subtractive, it's not like a 3D printer, but it slowly would work away at the wood kind of on an axial system. This is just my curiosity on that would kind of help digs, not on a like a huge macro level like an acre, but on a small level that'll kind of only like slowly take away. And obviously, if it hits something or something that out of the ordinary, I know that right now it's done very meticulously, but I would imagine this device would be like very slow and methodical with a 3D scanner and kind of like a little, I wouldn't say drill, but basically a drill. Anything like
Oh my
that?
gosh. Dude, my mind just went crazy, right, with the possibilities because how freaking cool would that be? Let's say this machine is like a square meter, right? And it's got the brush, it's got a little jet of air, it can blow things away. It's got a camera, it's preloaded with all the information about what should be present. And why not? I've never seen it. I don't think anything like that exists. But wow, what a world if it did. Because you could have a couple of grad students over here, a couple of these, you know, field like robot diggers over here. And if you had be kind of expensive, but if you could mount an XRF on there, and if it found something, it could shoot it, it could get a chemical profile and say, oh yeah, that's a fossil. That's a rock, that's dirt, that's a root, that's a fossil. And it could tell you that with absolute certainty. And I don't know that it would be able to collect them, but it could certainly uncover them. And it could do it a lot more carefully than a person. Because the problem is when you are out there digging in a channel and some soft sand, you're probing. Very few paleontologists are out there with a brush. Like, we're not archaeologists. We got to move a ton more rock because these animals are random. This is not an ancient civilization. And if you probe in there and you chink and you get excited and you get a little shot of adrenaline, you start digging faster, you can damage things. And if you uncover a battery of teeth, big steak knives of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, you're gonna lose it, man. You're gonna get like dino fever, and you can make mistakes in your excitement. So I think something like that, it may not be very practical, but it's certainly possible. And it'd be really cool to see an experiment with something like that. So here's a challenge for any robotics people out there, like build this thing for us because that would be amazing.
No, that sounds great. Uh, okay. What is the best thing you've found, in your opinion, obviously?
Man, that's such a hard one. Okay, so obviously the brand new dinosaur. Well, I found a couple of new dinosaurs. I found a so there's two groups of armored dinosaurs that are like ankylosaur. There's nodosaurs. They're very ornamental, same body style, no club on their tail. And then there's ankylosaurs, same thing, armored, looks like a armadillo, has a club on its tail. I found a new genus of the ankylosaur, and I found the skull of a new genus of a nodosaur in New Mexico when I was volunteering with the Denver Museum. And that one's actually being named after me. So that's
Oh,
pretty cool. So
that
like
is pretty cool.
that's the next like achievement of a paleontologist. Like finding any new fossil and having it named after you is really cool. But like dinosaurs, that's like a very exclusive club. Like, oh yeah, I got a dinosaur named after me. That's a pretty cool thing. So that's my top three, the ankylosaur and the nodosaur. But one of my favorite fossils, I was hunting mammals in South Dakota, and we're looking for these oreodonts, or like a weird hoof, not a hoofed mammal, but it's kind of like a sheep. And I was with a couple of friends. They wanted to go up this canyon. I wanted to go over here. So I walked over to this little hump, and I saw these teeth smiling at me out of the dirt. And I yelled at them. I was like, guys, I think I found a rhino skull. And they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. Keep digging. And they were all excited to go find some more stuff. So I'm prying on this thing and I'm getting it uncovered. And I don't understand what I'm looking at. I'm a dinosaur guy, so mammals is not my thing. But there was a big crack in the dirt behind it. So I was like, well, pieces are falling down this crack. So I just need to roll this thing out in my lap real quick. So I pop it out, it rolls into my lap, and I'm looking at this saber-toothed cat. And it's just right there. It's just in my lap between my hands. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like I just found a saber cat, and it's a Dinictus, which is a kind of a false cat from the Oligocene about 30 million years ago. And that's one of the coolest things that I've ever found, and just the way it all happened. And I set it on top of that hill, and I was so excited and just like adrenaline dump that I took off running to find my friends. And I'm out of breath. I finally find him a couple canyons up, and I'm like, guys, I found a cat skull. You're never gonna believe it. It's amazing. It's complete. The lower jaws, everything, the big fangs. And they're like, where is it? And I was like, oh crap. I set it down, and I just ran off. Like I have no idea where I was. So I spent the next like 45 minutes backtracking. Everything looks the same, but I finally found it sitting on top of this little mound of dirt where I'd left it next to my backpack. And it was such a cool day. That was such a cool
That
day.
does sound good. So with all this, I mean, that's such a good story to leave with. This is, what do you say to those kids who, like, they don't lose that fire, and kind of like where you were at in 2009? Like, w- what would you say to them if they're at that point that you were at in like 2009, where you weren't doing the dream job you have now? What would you tell them?
You don't have to do it every hour of every day. Do it as much as it brings you pleasure, and you don't lose that fire. It's kind of like being an artist. I mean, you can get burned out. Like when you're in the studio, I used to paint a lot, and the creative juices are flowing and you're making great art. It doesn't last, you know. So don't try to force it. Um, I would say just stick with it. Find the time, connect with people in organizations, a local fossil club, volunteer at a museum, get great experience, make some connections, and go at your pace, but don't ever give up, because I don't have a degree in paleontology. Um, in fact, you know, because of circumstances beyond my control, I didn't graduate high school, but it never stopped me from getting up every day, working hard, trying to be better than I was the day before, pursuing my passions, and never giving up, and never saying, you know, I can't do that. It's not for me. So I would say stick with it and find a pace that's comfortable for you. Don't let anybody else dictate the pace of your success.
Oh, I like that. That's a good quote. Did you just make that up? Because that's perfect.
I just came out.
Write it down. Uh, okay, last question. What is
If you
something
like
your
this week's
parents
episode
did that
of
you'd like to
People
pass on
More
to a next
Interesting
generation?
Than Me, please
And
follow
what
me
is
on Apple
something
Podcasts
new that
so you
you'd like
won't
to
miss
pass
out on more
like a
episodes
tradition
like
or
these.
an overall theme?
Okay. Um, what is something that my parents did? I mean, they indulged me. You know, they weren't into it. Wasn't their thing, but they saw that it brought me a lot of joy, and it was not a brain rot type of hobby. You know, I wanted to go to the museum. I wanted books. I wanted tools. I wanted to be outside, which they really enjoyed. And so, I mean, I think just nurturing that curiosity in your children. Um, I mean, my parents, that's definitely one thing that they get gold stars for. They were all about me just exploring the world and supported me every way they could. I think like building on that, for my children and what I hope that they take with them into adulthood, into eventually parenthood, is that it's great to support your kids, but even if it's not your thing, get into it. Get into it. Spend the time. Get down on their level, because you'll find more often than not, it may not be something that you would choose voluntarily, but doing it with your child brings you so much joy. And so I think making that connection with your children and passing that gift on of, do it with them. Don't just encourage them to do it and facilitate them doing it, but do it with them. And I think people would be surprised to find that they're into so many things that they would have never imagined.
Oh, that's great. And is there anything new or different that you would do?
Gosh, man, I'm a dinosaur. Like I hate technology, but I think I would encourage them um to just take advantage of that technology, and ride that wave, because that wave, I mean, I had a pager. I remember AOL chat rooms, that I'm from that generation.
Yeah.
And now like my kids know so much more about it than me. I think just uh encouraging them to capitalize on technology, but use it for good.
No, that's great. That's a new one. I haven't heard that. That's great. But well, thank you very much for taking your time out. I know you need plenty of time, and you volunteered yours to me. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Michael, it's been a pleasure. Love to come back anytime, and encourage you to come and visit us at the museum, Texas Through Time, and 110 North Waco Street, Hillsboro, Texas. And if you ever are feeling up to it, you have a standing invitation to bring to come out in the field and dig with us and bring your son.
That's awesome. So
So
where can people find you, by the way, too?
I'm on Instagram, real Andre Lujan. You can visit my website, andrelujan.com. You can visit our social media for the museum and PaleoTex. We're on Facebook, and texasthroughtime.org for the museum, and PaleoTex LLC for the website for PaleoTex.
That's awesome. And I'll attach a lot of those to the description if people want to check the notes. No,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, have a
Excellent.
great night, sir.
You too.